Welcome everybody to the latest episode of Collectively Speaking. This is a podcast series that looks at the big issues in the built environment. I get to sit down with members of the LDN Collective, and in future also we're going to be talking to collaborators and clients. And today I'm very excited. We're here at DAR Group's headquarters, and a big thank you to them for lending us a room. And I'm going to be talking to Tara Gbolade, who's one of the co-founders of Gbolade Studios. And she is one of the Mayor of London's design advocates and has some really exciting projects that they have already got worked on and also lots of interesting things in the pipeline. And just from a personal perspective, it was only 2 weeks ago that I was best man at my brother's wedding, and his new wife is Nigerian, as is Tara. So now my family has become a fusion of Nigerian and British culture, which is fantastic. And it's delightful to have this kind of fusion of cultural experience and expertise within the collective itself. I'm delighted to be here today with LDN Collective member Tara Gbolade. She is the co-founder of Gbolade Studios, who are fantastic architects that I'm really enjoying working with and having as members of the LDN Collective. For those of you who missed it, they had a brilliant exhibition recently where we really got to understand what makes them tick, and also the variety and range of the different types of projects and sort of thought leadership that they're getting into, which is very exciting. So, Tara, nice to see you. Tell us a bit about yourself and your background and how you got into architecture, and also the fact that, you know, you did set up a practice with your other half, which is unusual, but it is often a very rewarding thing, as I know, having worked in a family business before. So tell us a bit about that and about Gbolade Studios and how you got into it in the first place.
So I am an architect and Passivhaus designer. And in terms of sort of getting into architecture and ending up running a practice with my business partner, Lanre, and husband as well, I think for me, architecture has always been a social experiment. I grew up in Nigeria and in North Nigeria specifically. And at the time, I perhaps didn't appreciate this, but in hindsight, always, we had this wonderful home which had a beautiful compound and forecourt in the front of it, where I always played with my friends. And I always saw the comings and goings of my parents' friends. My parents are both doctors, and at a point when, after they had 3 kids, it was decided that my mom would work from home, if you like. So she decided to start a fashion studio. And so she built this little fashion studio just off the forecourt, which meant that I sort of witnessed her starting this sort of fashion house, but witnessed her employing great people that came in and out, so the people she worked with, but also seeing her friends who'd come in for a gossip. And we'd always sort of, as kids, run in and out and play with my friends in the front. And for me, growing up, I think seeing that, and also being from southeast Nigeria, so Ibadan, but living in the north, which is full of mainly Hausa people, and having people who spoke 4 different languages all the time around me, so different ethnicities in this part of Nigeria, had a profound impact on, I think, what I value in terms of shared space and the importance of shared space to create incidental meeting, informal meeting. I feel like I was raised by the community because I was always around these adults, but this experience isn't unique to me. A lot of housing and compounds, particularly in West Africa, have this sort of makeup where you have a few houses perhaps around a shared communal space. And it's something that I really appreciated growing up, and I perhaps didn't realize the impact until moving away and seeing really how to start to bring that into the type of architecture that we start to do.
So in many ways, that's what first got you interested in urban design and architecture, was having a place that worked so well because of the public space and the mix of uses, where you had, by the sounds of it, a live-work environment, which, you know, is something we're all striving to do more of here in London, in fact. It's also because London is often seen as a centre for placemaking and urban design, but somewhere along the way, I think we almost lost that ability for communities to stay connected, whether it's because cars started to dominate streets or council estates prevented people from getting to know each other because they're living in a block of flats. It's often without any public space, internally or externally, is often very difficult. And I know that was something that came across from watching your exhibition, is this sort of focus on mixed use and the public realm as being sort of key ingredients in your architectural projects. Is that something that you think, was it also an added advantage, having seen how these things can work internationally with different cultures? And you mentioned with people speaking lots of languages being around, and because quite often the built environment is designed by men and by, in this country, often by white middle-class men, as even my dad felt he was in a minority when he was one of the only working-class architects to make a success of his practice all those years ago. So just tell me, as somebody who is sort of from an ethnic minority now with a strong emerging practice in London, do you feel like there's still those barriers are there? And also the second part of that question is, how do you feel that you're offering something a bit more different and interesting because you appreciate different cultures?
I think those are great questions. I think maybe I'll start with the second one first. In terms of how we feel we're offering, that experience in growing up allowed me to really understand the interdependence between how we live, and certainly how we lived growing up in Nigeria versus perhaps sometimes more independent living. And home, or the definition of home, really extended beyond four walls. That there seemed to be no boundary. What that meant is that this connection with people and with each other just felt integral, and we now know, of course, that connection with each other and opportunities specifically for informal and incidental meeting allows us to stave off challenges such as loneliness, and particularly as we get older, as a society, being able to connect with different generations in shared space was critical. So I think there was no doubt in our mind when we started practice that we'd be working across both the public and private sector, because up until starting practice, a lot of the work I certainly had done in my previous experience looked at really just the building. And it was critical for us to look at the space between buildings as having the same weight as the buildings themselves. So that reflects hopefully that the work that we do, that's a key strand of what we do. It's something we integrally believe in. And then the second part of your question in terms of the experience, I guess, being a Black woman in architecture, I think, again, I'm going to have to harp back to Nigeria, but I think I was very, very lucky to have grown up in Nigeria because I was insulated to so much that many of other minoritized groups in the UK experienced. Like I was insulated from a lot of maybe the discrimination, and it actually took me quite a long time to translate that discrimination because I grew up in a place where everyone around me, well, could do whatever it is they wanted. So I feel very, very grateful actually for that upbringing. However, having transitioned over to the UK and slowly starting to experience these barriers, both as being a woman, and certainly I felt definitely not respected when I walked into a room. And I'd walk in, I remember always sort of walking in as an associate, and I'd come in with an architect or architectural assistant who was a white man, which is fine, which is great. But I was always sort of referred to as second or after. And that really grated on me. It's really irritating. And so I reached out to sort of get mentorship on how to address that and how to sort of reclaim space, reclaim power, reclaim how I walked into a room, which is just, an extra burden that many who look like me will have to navigate and engage with. But this is the world we live in. However, I think we all have a role, everyone in society, we have a role and responsibility to change the status quo. And I think we're all duty-bound to make changes.
That's absolutely fascinating and interesting to hear about your journey and how that's influenced the way you think about these things. But I think you're right, just from my own sort of anecdotal evidence, there is those sort of unconscious biases are still they're very much a part of a lot of the structures that are around planning property, the built environment. In many ways, I think we are still way behind the curve when other industries, other countries have got to grips with challenging these sort of institutional structural inequalities, as it were.
I think what that reflects is that we're leaving brilliant players on the bench. We're not taking full advantage of the diversity we have in London, in the UK. We've got all these phenomenal resources available to us, particularly people who come from other countries, because they have different experiences that they're able to bring into the wealth of what we already have in the UK. It just makes common business sense. Even if you didn't want to change the world, even if you didn't have the hearts to change it. I think just from a commercial standpoint, you are an enhanced business by really going out of your way to ensure that you have the most diverse working group that you can do, because it addresses a lot of the blind spots that we all have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, that's why I feel like the LDN Collective is really galvanized as a group, because we have that diversity. There's the visible diversity in terms of being, equal in terms of gender and having ethnic minorities represented. But then there's the sort of the diversity of thought and thinking, which I think is often a big issue in the built environment too, where you almost feel if you're a specialist in something like social impact or cultural placemaking, there's almost a feeling of often being not at the table for those types of disciplines as well, where there's the sort of more core disciplines of architectural planning or financial viability that are often at the table very early on.
Yeah.
Which can cause problems because you're not thinking about things that actually will make it a better quality project in terms of the outcomes and how it affects the community early enough. And I think so that's really interesting that you say that. And I think that is why people love London too. I was at an event recently with lots of people from different American cities, and they love the fact that London is so diverse and so properly integrated, and which is not the case in many American cities. I think that we have come a long way, but clearly there's a hell of a lot longer way to go.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a bit about one of our recent experiences where we collaborated on a bid together, because it was bittersweet, I think, in the end. And I wonder whether we can sort of try and draw some lessons or conclusions from it, because we bid for a project that was out in the public domain in Northampton for a sort of town centre regeneration. And we kind of got to know about it about a year beforehand, I think it was, and went up there to visit different stakeholders, met with the council, met with the university after that, and really got to know and understand Northampton, what makes it tick and what the issues are and so on. And we spent a lot of time and effort on putting together what I thought was a fantastic proposal, which was led by Lady Studios. And in the end, they just gave it as a direct tender to a much more established practice. That was obviously very disappointing. And I wonder, for me, whether there's some sort of structural issues there around the way work is awarded and commissioned. Tell me what your thoughts are about that.
I completely agree. I thought it was a brilliant bid, but then I'd say that. But we had a really strong team, and I thought we, as a collective, were able to pull together some really exciting thoughts and ideas that we could throw at the project. Really, after having understood, I think, a lot of that part of the town centre, I think it was terribly disappointing. I think we were only about 5 points off the winner in the end, which seemed pretty close. I'm unsure if people were shortlisted. I'm sure there was some type of shortlist, but it was a process we really enjoyed. We enjoyed getting to know other people or other companies who were part of the LDN Collective and getting to work with them and bringing really great ideas, I think, to the table.
I think there's often a real value in failing at these things, because you learn, don't you? And
absolutely.
I was reading just recently, I think by somebody who has a lot more listeners to their podcast than I do, Stephen
Barlett.
Yes. Yeah. And it was a big focus, was talking to these chief execs about the fact that you've got to fail fast and the more you fail, the more successful you're going to be ultimately.
Yeah.
And so it's about what you take away and learn, and hopefully we can have conversations with any developers that are looking to actually make this thing happen and deliver it and partner with the local authority. And we've got a great bid ready to go in that case. So Tara, I hear that you're working some really interesting projects at the moment. Can you tell us a bit more about those? I know there's some that are sensitive, but some that you can maybe talk a bit more about.
Yeah, absolutely. We're working on a range. We've got a few on the table at the moment. One is a group of reserve matter applications for a large housing association who've got quite a few garage sites in and around Norwich, actually. We are getting ready some really stellar small housing developments to go through to planning over the next few months. And I think that's a really interesting and exciting project because the clients there is looking at using modern methods of construction, and they're trying to ensure that these particular garage sites act as flagship sites for a lot of what they'll be looking at in the future. We'll be pushing the boundaries when it comes to sustainability, as always. That's expected with us as a practice. We're also working in London. We're working with Lewisham Council at the moment on a brownfield site where we're looking at between 80 and 100 new homes, which is going to be incredibly place-led, making sure, particularly because even though it's a brownfield site, it's underutilized. It's got these beautiful trees around the site. It is relatively quiet, actually, for this part of London. And we want to make sure that serenity translates in any new development that we look at, and people feel like they have a really strong sense of place where they are at the moment.
You mentioned at the beginning in your introduction that you're a Passivhaus designer, and I'm quite interested in that because as one of my sort of other roles is I chair the built environment policy for West London Business, and I was talking to their chief exec just recently, and he said they were looking for sort of case studies and expertise in very low carbon impact and energy usage for development because they have the biggest issues around supply, around electricity and supply and grid capacity that's actually preventing them building homes now because you can't actually get agreement to have electricity for another 20 years or something. So tell me a bit more about that if you could. And I know a big part of that is around retrofit as well. So maybe any projects you're working on that involve sort of retrofitting or Passivhaus.
Passivhaus actually is a really low energy building, which has really low operational energy use. High levels of insulation and airtightness is incredibly important. And so therefore ventilation is something that's built in from the outset. So it really looks at adopting a whole house approach to how we look at new builds and retrofits actually. And on the point of retrofit, we are alongside sort of new build passive homes and passive houses. We've just been awarded a contract where we're looking at some retrofit projects, specifically coming from the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which really looks at housing associations who've applied to the government for funding to retrofit their existing assets. And so we'll be looking at a group of apartments, a mix of apartments as well as dwellings, homes, where we'll be looking at the retrofit strategy there, but specifically these are all listed buildings. So they're slightly more complex, a little trickier to navigate and to address both retaining the really important heritage of the building and navigating that with our ambitions for low energy development. So that's where we are at the moment in addressing retrofit. But retrofit, as we know, is one of the biggest challenges we have in the UK at the moment. And it's really important that we start to get to grips with how we address our existing assets. I think everybody already knows the stats that by 2050, we already have 80% of the homes that currently are in existence. So for us as a practice, we've done a lot of work on retrofit. We've done a lot of writing on sort of the approach to retrofits. And working with existing clients. We just have a project that we'll be completing actually over the next couple of months on a large retrofit dwelling. However, I don't know why, but we've also decided to embark on undertaking the PASS 2035 certification, if you like, to become retrofit coordinators, and we're doing that with the Retrofit Academy. And that's a really important role to ensure that there's a clear methodology and process for how we retrofit our homes so we're not building in unintended consequences further down the line.
That's really interesting. We had one of our podcasts was with Conisbee, the structural engineers, and they were talking about working on these very iconic listed buildings like Royal Albert Hall and even Buckingham Palace.
Wow.
But then it's the sort of everyday buildings, isn't it, that are going to be the big challenge. And there is so much housing stock out there that other countries seem to have been able to be much more proactive about. I'm told in Germany they've retrofitted almost all of their social housing anyway, or already. But we've got a long way to go, haven't we?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, the UK has, I think, the leakiest buildings in all of Europe, which is a big shame, but also a big opportunity for us all to upskill. And that's not just consultants, but right down the supply chain, or right up the supply chain through to contractors, or finding the right contractors. I think what's refreshing to see, particularly say today, compared to 5 years ago, 3 years ago even, is that we're now working with contractors who are as excited perhaps as we are in getting retrofit right and learning on the jobs that they're going on. We're not a flood with them at the moment in the UK, but I think it's really good to see this transition within our industry. We continue to make the right decisions irrespective of wider challenges in the UK at the moment.
And I suppose that one of the strong arguments for spending the money on retrofitting is then the savings that you get in terms of energy costs. And
absolutely,
and I think that's something that's not well enough understood either by homeowners or government. In fact, to try and subsidize, incentivize people to do this. And I think that's something we need to, there's more awareness raising and education around the subject, isn't there?
Critically so. Energy bills, and us importantly, our health and well-being and respiratory challenges that we have in the UK. So the opportunity to ensure that retrofitted buildings make us well, and not ill. Exactly. Yeah. There's so many advantages that we really need to get on with it quickly.
So Tara, one thing I do know is that there's a lot of different architectural practices in London. It seems to be the place that practices want to be, whether they're international or that has a lot of homegrown practices. Tell us a bit about what makes your practice special, and the sort of skill sets and philosophy that you have that sets you apart.
I think from the outset, when we set up practice, we've relied heavily on our knowledge and skills. We've been incredibly passionate about sustainable and regenerative design from the outset. And for us, that looks at sustainability, not just environmental, but definitely social and economic sustainability, which is why when we speak, we can't just look at energy performance of, say, a building. And this is why for us, it's critical that we understand the wider context of how we approach design and delivery. So we're quite data-led as a practice, and that data being local data, perhaps who uses the streets in a particular space, why particular streets perhaps might not be used, how people feel safe or not in an area. And so we tend to draw a lot of that data either from local authority or very much boots on the ground and speaking to people and trying to understand what it is that makes people tick, how safe, again, they feel in space, and how easily they feel they can navigate a part of the city or a neighborhood. And that is critical for how we approach any design, big or small, listening and understanding who we're speaking to so that we're able to design appropriately. We very much see our roles as custodians. We're the professionals, but people who live in an area are the experts in where they live. And it feels natural and intuitive to be able to tap into that because people are passionate about their homes or their community centres. And so for us, that's a critical aspect in how we approach design. Additionally, and so building into or leaning into that data process, we are quite iterative in how we work. You made the point earlier about failing quickly. Hopefully, we like to think that we fail, we iterate, we test, we fail, we iterate, we test, and hopefully we fail forward. But that really comes into coming back to that data point. So we do a lot of energy modeling in-house so that when we're presenting options to a client, we have a really strong understanding of our operational energy or embodied carbon of a particular development or design approach. Again, because we don't feel there's any other, considering our climate and biodiversity emergencies, in our view, there's no other way to approach design.
Well, that's fantastic. And that sort of very much vindicates my sort of initial idea about bringing you into the collective, was that you do offer that sort of different approach where there's an element of humility, but you're always in listening mode and looking to gather as much information as possible before coming up with a response. Because I think architecture often gets quite a bit of stick for being decisions that are taken elsewhere by people that don't know the area, and just to hear you say that local people are the experts is, I'm sure, going to be good for most community people to hear out there, because it's not always the done thing. There's a question that I've put to some others on the podcast, which I'm really interested to know your response, which if you were to sort of put yourself in one of these categories in terms of whether you're an agitator, an activator, an ambassador, or a protector, how do you see yourself, and how would you like others to see you?
That's a really good question. I think I would probably put myself in as a protector. And I say that specifically thinking from the experience of a minoritized person, I think, in the UK. And the reason I say that is about 5.5 years ago, I, alongside 4 others, decided to co-found the Paradigm Network, which really focuses on championing Black and Asian representation in the built environment. And the reasoning for that at the time was just to see if there were others out there, because one always felt like one was alone in the world and trying to navigate the construction industry. And I think it was really there. I committed to doing what I can to contribute to civic life. Over the years, we've grown to over 700 members, where we're able to support students and professionals in their careers. I think it's really interesting. On my way here, very randomly, I bumped into someone who came up and said, "You won't know me, but you placed me in a practice a couple of years ago. I'm still there. Thank you so much." I couldn't believe it. Wow. Because sometimes you think, are we making the impact that we set out to make? But to hear someone live in living color to come up and say that was truly extraordinary. And I think it gives one hope. It allows you to keep going even when the journey gets weary. So I think I'd probably hope that I'd be seen as a protector of those who feel they might not have a voice, and that I'm able to do my best to champion their needs.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And so I'm just interested to hear a bit more about that. So the Paradigm Network, do they sort of help to bring people into different practices that are from ethnic minorities, whether that's students or...
That is part of, yes, absolutely. That is one of the strands. So for students, we're very keen to hear from students. They're sometimes having challenges trying to get into the workplace, and we can often direct them to particular job applications or architectural practices, or public sector will indeed reach out to us as the Paradigm Network because they're intentional about diversifying their pool of applicants. And so we're able to distribute particular job applications that are necessary, where we support them with CV writing and with prepping for interviews. We have a lot of informal mentorship within the group. And I want to say that, Paradigm Network is very much a grounds up type of network. The co-founders are not responsible for a lot. I think what we do is provide a platform where people feel safe enough to ask whatever questions that they want to ask. And what's beautiful is to hear mentorship opportunities coming through that. We've helped people who might be architects, who might be looking to move into the public sector. We've helped them with that transition. And we've partnered with a lot of larger practices, specifically architectural practices at the moment, which has been brilliant.
What I'm interested to know, and I'm sure others are too, is what's next for Gbolade Studios? Where do you see yourselves in 5, 10, 15 years' time?
World domination. No. I think, we really enjoy what we're doing. I think we want to continue to work with brilliant clients. We've been very lucky to be able to work with great clients so far, and we want to continue to be able to curate our clients and work with the type of people that, we believe share the same values and ethos with us. It's been a really busy year, as you highlighted. We had an exhibition earlier in the year. We were also part of the Venice Biennale, in the Architecture Biennale, which has been fantastic. So for us at the moment, it's heads down with getting some delivery work done. We'd love to continue working on strategic projects. We've really enjoyed sort of policy writing when it comes to sort of master plans and design coding. And I think we're keen to do more of that in the UK, but critically abroad as well. I think we're we're super excited to be able to move beyond the boundaries of the UK as well.
Fantastic, and I hope I can help you to do some of that. And that, you know, I'm really looking forward to continuing working with you and Lanre and everyone at Gbolade Studios. Thank you very much, Tara. That was a brilliant conversation, and great to get to know you even better. It's just really fantastic to see a practice that is ethnic-led, minority-led, that is two people that are life partners and professional partners that are really making waves. And I think it says a lot about London and the built environment scene, that you are now starting to really make a big impact, and long may that continue for you and others. And great to hear that the Paradigm Network is a network that's helping to kind of change things in a more structural way too.